Okay, welcome back to our next installment of the video lecture series, number 4, finishing out anatomy and physiology. All the videos should be available for everyone to review for our exam coming up next week. I think this is going to be the final section of the video series on Chapter 7. All right, just getting a few things organized before we get started. So let's look at the nervous system and see what we have here. All right, so we have the nervous system. The functions of the nervous system. It's a big, really, communications. The nervous system is responsible for sending out communication and receiving communication, controlling motor function and transmitting motor impulses. The nervous system is going to divide into two main structures. We have the central nervous system followed by the peripheral nervous system. So it's going to divide into these two main structures. Let's talk about the central nervous system first. We have the brain and the spinal cord are the key players here inside the central nervous system. The brain, of course, performs those complex functions of the involuntary and voluntary. And remember, when we think of voluntary, we associate that with skeletal muscle, and involuntary with smooth and cardiac muscle. And then we have the spinal cord, and the spinal cord again is basically the highway that helps the brain relay information to and then receive information from the peripheral nervous system. The brain is three main subdivisions of the brain: the cerebrium, the cerebellum, and then the brainstem. The brain requires a constant supply of glucose, in which it can't produce itself. It's totally dependent upon the circulatory system to deliver this glucose to it. Let's look at the cerebrium. The functions of the cerebrium: manage motions under conscious control, sensation, thought, and associated memory. Then we move to the cerebellum, aka the small brain. And its function is to coordinate muscle activity, maintain balance through impulses from the eyes and ears. And then we have the brainstem. And the brainstem has three major departments that it's responsible for. One, it affects respiration through the Respiratory Center. And then we have the cardiac center, and that's going to regulate heart rate and contraction force. Oh, sorry, y'all. Back up one more. And then we have the Vasomotor Center, and that's going to control the diameter of the vessels. When we talk about specifically smooth muscle can contract, it can dilate. So vessel tone, maybe better word for that. And so major centers there. Then it breaks, we break it down. We talk about the respiratory center already. We've mentioned the cardiac center, how it regulates heart rate. And of course, the vasomotor center controls blood pressure through the dilation and constriction of blood vessels. And then we talk about the spinal cord. Major function, of course, is to conduct the conduction of nerve impulses. And this takes us to our next subdivision, which is the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. And the PNS, we can talk about it, and when we talk about the PNS, we have afferent and efferent nerves. And afferent nerves carry sensory information from the body to the spinal cord and the brain. And the opposite of that, of course, efferent transmits information from the brain and the spinal cord to the body. And I had mentioned in class about checking reflexes in your knee and how we can test both efferent and afferent information from when we go to the doctor and they check your reflexes in your knee with like a reflex hammer. Functional divisions of the nervous system. And we've talked about this in class 2, how we have the voluntary nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The voluntary nervous system influences the activity of the skeletal muscles for movement. And we talked about how that's different from the autonomic nervous system, because that's your involuntary muscles and glands. We mentioned smooth muscles, cardiac muscle. And here we can see that this division, the autonomic nervous system, breaks into 2 more divisions, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic is a response to trauma, blood loss, or that fight or flight that we've talked about. And it uses the neurotransmitters norepinephrine and epinephrine. And we mentioned the function of the parasympathetic nervous system, and that is basically it kind of brings the sympathetic under control. So once the fight or flight event is over, the parasympathetic is what calms us down. We watched the video from the bear, and I may try to include it here. It's pretty short. Let's see if I can. Let me see if I can try that real quick. Stand by just one.
Hey. What the hell do you do? Just don't move.
All right, so I think that's a perfect example of the activation of the sympathetic nervous system for sure. And so let me pass it. There we go. So that release of epi and norepi, I'm sure caused the pulse rate to go up, including their blood pressures to go up. I'm sure it caused their pupils to dilate, and all of those are responses from your sympathetic nervous system. And then when the event is over, we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which kicks in to bring the processes back to normal. The reticular activating system, excuse me. So what we wanted to remember here is that it is a means of determining consciousness, and I wanted you guys to remember at least one hemisphere must be functioning in order to be conscious per the definition of the RAS. All right, the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is made up of several glands whose secretions cause specific actions in specific organs. It includes the thyroid gland, the adrenal gland, the pituitary gland, and the gonads. So let's take a look at this. And so it's these hormones that are developed by the endocrine system and then transported out by the circulatory system. The thyroid gland and the parathyroid gland excuse me, are responsible for maintaining strong and healthy bones, and that's through the metabolism of calcium. We have the adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidneys. This is what secretes your epi and your norepi. Then we have the gonads and the testes, which produce hormones that govern reproduction and sex characteristics. We talked about the islets of Langerhans. When we talk about these, we associate them. This ganglion of cells is basically what they are, but we associate it with the production of insulin. We have the pituitary gland, also known as the master gland, that really deals with just about everything. Anything from growth to the thyroid, to parathyroid, the pancreas. And then we get to the neurotransmitters epi and norepi, again secreted by the adrenal glands, responsible for the signs and symptoms seen from the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. What we just saw from the bear climbing the tree. We associate alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, and beta 2 with these, and we'll talk about that. Alpha 1, vasoconstriction. Okay, this is what causes the shunning to the extremities. I'm sorry, from the extremities. And this causes them to be cool and pale. And we can associate that as well with blood and its function, which is to help maintain temperature control inside the body. It also causes the sweat glands to be activated. So this is where the sweating comes from. And alpha 2, I think we, for this purpose of this class, we can just say that it regulates the release of alpha 1. Beta 1, and I mentioned this in class about between the difference between beta 1 and beta 2. You know, beta 1 is 1 heart, beta 2, 2 lungs. So beta 1, all cardiac related, heart rate, the forces of contraction, the speed of the impulse coming down through the SA node, AV node, through the conduction system. Beta 2, so this is going to be the 2 lungs. We have smooth muscle dilation from the bronchioles. Epi, one of 2 primary hormones secreted by the sympathetic nervous system. Epi has all 4 properties, A1, A2, or alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, and beta 2. Expect all of the signs and symptoms of the properties if administered. So we just talked about those properties. So we're going to expect that we're going to have vasoconstriction. We're going to have an increase in heart rate, an increase in blood pressure, and we should see smooth muscle dilation in the bronchioles. When we look at norepi, we look at a very strong alpha 1 and alpha 2. So we should see some really strong vasoconstriction from norepi. We will see, however, a weaker beta 1 and beta 2 response. And then the integumentary system, we covered that in class pretty well. Epidermis, dermis, and subcutaneous levels. The digestive system, we talked about that. And then we kind of covered the organs. We mentioned the pancreas. Back to the, I just want to mention about the integumentary system, that its function, the protection of the skin. We get that protection against bacteria and other organisms. And when we talk about the abdominal organs, we just kind of need to understand their functions. And that is it for the most part. Okay, I'm trying to keep the video watchable and not waste your time. I'm not going to go through all of that on the functions of all of the digestive functions of the digestive organs. Covered it in class. I think we did a pretty good job of that. I think everybody understood it pretty well. So this is the last video for this chapter. Test is coming up next week. You have a whole weekend to study. Between the videos and class notes and reading, you should be fine. But it's good. You're still going to have to study this weekend. You still got to put it all together. You still need to be looking at Chapter 8 as well. It's not going to go away, and that test will be coming, pretty soon after Test 2. So, pathophysiology videos to follow shortly, and we will see you guys next week.